Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Bernard, President and CEO of Women's College Hospital Foundation. I'm so pleased to have you here for our In Conversation With. Today, we have a very special guest. And before we get started, I'm just going to take a moment to do our land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that the land upon which we are gathered in Toronto as the sacred gathering place for many Indigenous people of Turtle Island. With much respect, we uplift the sacred diversity of the original First Peoples and caretakers of this land that we live and work on. I'm joining you today from the ancestral homelands of the Adirondacks, the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the Haudenosaunee Territory and Nations, home of the dish with one spoon. We acknowledge the Indigenous peoples across many territories you all live and work on as well, and in all of our unique expressions, richness of knowledge, lived experience, and history. In advance of today's conversation, we also acknowledge and celebrate the land that we are on today. And we must acknowledge how much work there is still to be done and that we need to do to have a truly equitable world. We know that our conversation today touches Indigenous women, especially who are overrepresented amongst victims of sex trafficking and experience some of the highest instances of violence in the country. And as we dive into today's conversation, we carry that knowledge in the front of our minds as allies and stewards of change. All right, so we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping and housekeeping notes before we get started. Your videos and microphones are mute, so you can continue with your lunchtime activities. If you're joining us over your lunch hours, they're automatically turned off. The Q&A box is below. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the event, although we will be answering them at the end in the question and answer period. The webinar is being recorded, so don't worry about missing anything, and it will be shared afterwards. We'll also make some fantastic resources available to you and all the attendees after the events, which will be sent automatically to you in your inbox, or you're free to check back on the event website. Okay, we're going to get started. Today, I'm honored to be joined by the very inspiring guest, almost Dr. Rhonelle Bruder, who is is a Ph.D. candidate. Rhonelle Bruder, welcome to our show. I hope you had a chance to read her bio, but Rhonelle is deeply passionate about sex trafficking and combating it, and she's a passionate advocate for sex trafficking survivors. She founded the project I Rise to support survivors as they transition back into society after escaping their abusers, and she's currently pursuing her Ph.D. in Social and Behavioral Health Sciences at the Dalla School of Public Health at the University of Toronto, with a focus on researching the experiences of sex trafficking survivors specifically. She holds the Human Anti-Trafficking Response Team research trainee position here at Women's College Research Institute, where she's a member of the team addressing sex trafficking through research and education called the ASTER team, led by the internationally recognized researchers Dr. Janice Dumont and Robin Mason. This is the first ever history-making pan-Canadian research initiative focused on understanding the needs and experiences of sex trafficking survivors. We're so proud to be trailblazing in this important area after 140 years of working in women's health. And I'm so proud to be here to talk about the work that the Human Anti-Sex Trafficking Response Team that we know as HART has supported and is the founding donor of this research nationally here in Canada. This work is groundbreaking, and we are deeply grateful for their support and their leadership in advancing health research for women who have experienced sex trafficking. Welcome, 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 Rhonelle. Please say hello.
Hi, Jennifer, and thank you so much for having me here today and for recognizing the importance of having this conversation on sex trafficking. I have to give a big thank you to the HART Foundation for their investment in Women's College Hospital for research for survivors of sex trafficking, but also for their continued work in supporting anti-trafficking initiatives. So thank you. Really, really excited to have this conversation.
Well, let's dive in. We're going to start off with a little bit of level setting. What you're trying to do here is so important, but I think there's a lot of misperceptions about sex trafficking. I have two boys and I have nieces and nephew, and everybody's aware of sex trafficking, but I don't think that a lot of people know that it's $1 billion industry in Canada, and it touches people in every corner of the country. And it's not at all like what we see in the movies and Taken with, kids being kidnapped on vacation. And I think that that's part of the challenge, is that there's so many misperceptions and there's so very little that we know. I was shocked to learn that there had never been really formal research, and people didn't really understand the stories of survivors that you're so invested in. And so we needed to ask the right questions and do the research and education to level set. And I think you've done something so amazing and novel here, and that's where we're going to start. We know so little about sex trafficking and how best to support survivors. And that's because we haven't asked the right questions. So let's start the conversation off with a short video. Your own research is aimed at uncovering these important answers, and you created this video we're about to play, and that's going to help level set this whole conversation. So play video, please.
Hi there. You may have heard of something called sex trafficking. I know, it's been in the news a lot lately, and you're probably thinking it could never happen to you or any of your friends. But the truth is, sex trafficking is already happening around the world, and it's closer than you think. Young girls and boys, some the same age as you or even younger, and from all different backgrounds and ethnicities, become victims of trafficking. And most of them have no idea it was even happening until it was too late. My name is Rhonelle Bruder, and I'm a sex trafficking survivor and an anti-trafficking advocate. So what is sex trafficking? It's when a person, generally a vulnerable underage youth, is lured, tricked, and manipulated into selling their body for sex to make money for somebody else. So how does it happen? It typically starts with luring, where traffickers will look for vulnerable young people to connect with. And this can happen anywhere, like at school, the mall, or even online. It can be something that seems innocent, like sending a message on social media, like, "Hey, beautiful." If they get a reply, that's the first step in the luring process. They'll try to learn as much as possible about the person and their life. This may not seem like a bad thing, but traffickers will use this information to manipulate the person later on. Next is the grooming. Traffickers will use all the information they gathered to play in the person's emotions and any insecurities they have, like problems with their parents, school, anxiety, or body image issues. Then they may get love bombed, meaning within a really short period of time, the trafficker showers the victim with attention, expensive gifts, trips, even drugs and alcohol to impair their judgment. Next is the manipulation and control. At this point, the victim thinks the trafficker is their boyfriend, girlfriend, or even best friend. But here, they'll really start to push the boundaries and pressure the victim to do things they aren't comfortable with, while slowly isolating them from family and friends. That's what leads to exploitation. This might start with working in a massage parlor or stripping at a club. They'll tell the victim, "It's just this once," or think about how much money they'll make. Then it progresses into sex acts. And if the victim tries to say no or leave, the trafficker may threaten them or become violent. Sex trafficking is real, and it's happening to girls and boys around the world. So remember how trafficking happens, and talk to a trusted friend or adult if you feel that you or your friends may be in danger. And lastly, if something seems too good to be true, trust your instincts. Thanks for listening.
Oh, it's so sad that we even need that video, but it was so well done. I love that it was done sort of in a cartoon format, which made it really accessible, and almost it took down the barriers but the message is actually quite sad. So tell us a little bit about how you were able to articulate something so complex, around this devastating issue, and really what inspired you personally to do it.
Yeah, so I've been asked oftentimes, what is sex trafficking? And I would always find myself trying to explain it. It was oftentimes very long-winded, it was convoluted. And I realized there wasn't a very simple, straightforward tool to be able to, as you said, explain something that is very complex and misunderstood. And so I wanted to create this video as something that parents, young people, community members, anybody could watch this and be able to take away, what is sex trafficking? Potentially, what can it look like? And what should you do if you find yourself or you someone that might be a victim of trafficking? Understanding that a lot of people's idea of trafficking is really based on a lot of myths and mistruths, or even things that we see on TV, things like movies like Taken and things like that, where there's the idea that someone's going to come, a stranger is going to come and take you and kidnap you away. And while that does happen in some instances, oftentimes trafficking is it's this very relational form of exploitation where it's someone that who's taking time to get to know you, understand what are your unmet needs, and then use that to exploit you. And so when I started doing a lot of work within anti-trafficking, that's what I was doing. I was talking about trafficking. I was doing a lot of education. I've worked with the Toronto Police, with Children's Aid Society, really focused on dispelling a lot of the myths around trafficking. And then that shifted to wanting to support survivors of trafficking. And so through Project I Rise, we created two programs. One, our branding tattoo removal program, and then our vocational skills program, our survivor leadership. And now I find myself as a Ph.D. student working with Astor and Women's College Research Institute, really focused on creating evidence-based knowledge around sex trafficking, because I feel like that is still missing. And I think the what is sex trafficking tool is amazing, it's helpful, but we still need more evidence-based research. We still need a lot more work, I think, within the research area around this issue.
You're so right. And I'm so pleased that you chose to focus your PhD work on this. I think it's one of the areas that, even educators shy away from. And the fact that the HART funding allowed us to do the first ever research in Canada was actually pretty shocking to me, because I think when we first approached this, we thought we would just go get the resources and help and launch a nationwide, perhaps internationally focused program. And then when we really started digging into it, we found out that there wasn't actually a lot of research. But I want to dial back before we delve into some of the more technical things, that one-to-one relationship that you were talking about with the sex traffickers and the grooming. And, perhaps the age of people that are involved in sex trafficking. Can you talk a little bit about, some of the high profile, stuff that we see, like with Nygaard and Epstein, and what the profile of a person being trafficked is really like, and what are their vulnerabilities that these people are preying on?
Absolutely. So I know when we say names like Jeffrey Epstein, Peter Nygaard, R. Kelly, I mean, these are quite familiar to most people because these are really high profile sex trafficking cases. But what we see within domestic sex trafficking within a Canadian context is really what was demonstrated within the What is Sex Trafficking video. It is that relational element. So the trafficker knows their victim. It can be a boyfriend, it can be a friend, it can be an acquaintance at school, it can be a family member, but it's somebody who has often taken time to get to know that person, understand where are their vulnerabilities, and I think when we think of young people, we think of ourselves when we were younger, every young person has vulnerabilities. You're it's going such a difficult time. Teenage life. Yeah, like think of all the things you went through when you were younger, bullying, insecurities around our body, so many different things that we're going through. Traffickers are looking, like this is what they're looking for. They're looking for those vulnerabilities. Is this person disconnected from friends and family? Are they being bullied? Do they have a low self-esteem? What is it that I can come in and become sort of that Prince Charming, particularly with the boyfriend type of trafficker? And then we see that love bombing, right? So this is shouting somebody with gifts, with money. If drugs are involved, might be offering them an unlimited supply of free drugs. But of course, this is ultimately to be able to control them later on. And then that's where we lead to that next stage where we see the control, the manipulation, the coercion, but the relationship has already been built. that bond is already there. So oftentimes the victim will see the trafficker as their boyfriend, as a friend, as someone who wants to help them, as someone who cares about them. And so this is why trafficking is so hard to sort of recognize. You know, you can't just walk down the street and say someone, oh, she's being trafficked.
Right. It's not a crime ring like that we saw
Yes.
in Taken. I think a lot of people's perception is that it's this massive, elaborate crime ring. And it often is like this one-to-one relationship that's being used to exploit an individual that's vulnerable. And then I would think the shame of being involved. I mean, I saw in the video where they say, you know, it starts with, you know, something small, and then it elevates itself to perhaps stripping. And once you've stripped once and been exposed that way, how do you go back to just going back to high school and being a normal person? And so I can see how insidious it becomes. So high schools, junior highs, you know, people that are, you know, young women that might be in the shelter system, in the foster care system. I'm sure all of those are places where traffickers one-to-one hide and exploit these young people. So let's talk a little bit more about vulnerability. Like off the top, we spoke about Indigenous women and how they are overrepresented. And there are many groups that are overrepresented in trafficking relative to their size in the population. So let's speak a little bit more in detail about things like race and gender and socioeconomic status and how those intersectionalities play into who the trafficker identifies and targets.
Yeah, and so we often say anybody can become a victim of sex trafficking. And while that is true, there are groups that are more likely to be victimized. And so within Canada, 97% of reported cases of victims of trafficking are women and girls. 3/4 of those are under the age of 25, the time that they were first trafficked. So it's very much a gendered crime and a crime that impacts young women and girls.
Right.
And then on top of that, and you spoke to this when you were doing the land acknowledgement, Indigenous people make up 4% of our population, but Indigenous women and girls account for almost 50% of victims of trafficking.
Unbelievable.
So they are overrepresented as victims of trafficking. We see that as well within other marginalized communities, so racialized communities, the LGBTQ plus communities, immigrant and newcomer communities. We also see within not only just vulnerability to trafficking, but being able to identify someone as a trafficking. And there's a term called adultification bias.
Right.
And that is the idea, and I'm sure you've heard this before as well, where some young people are seen more adult-like or adultified, so viewed as being more adult, less needing of protection, more sexualized. We often see this with Indigenous women and girls and Black women and girls. Right. And so we have communities that are at higher risk of being exploited.
Unbelievable that in this day and age, there would be even a debate around whether there are certain groups that are targeted for this type of activity. It's a shocking statistic that 40% of the people are from the Indigenous community, and clearly that community is being probably targeted because of its overall vulnerability within within our society. And I want to talk a little bit more about the role that you see in healthcare now. So if there are barriers just generally to people getting out of trafficking, one of the biggest ones is getting the type of support and healthcare they need to exit. And we've heard this time and time again. And when I first sat down with the women that came to us from HART, that was one of the things that they really wanted to support and help with. And that's why we needed to do the research to figure out what was the best pathway to help young women exit. And again, this idea of race and gender identity, trauma, socioeconomic status, the lack of compassionate care all played into it, into accessing healthcare for particularly victims of trafficking. And like you said, it's not like they put up their hand and say, I'm a victim of trafficking. They come in all different ways, and most of them don't talk about being trafficked. So what does it look like when a young woman primarily comes into the healthcare sector as a victim of trafficking and needs to access support? Just give us a picture of that.
Sure, absolutely. And one thing I did want to note, just to your prior question, is I want people to understand that there are groups that are marginalized, that are more likely to be victimized, but we do see young people in the suburbs, middle-class families from higher socioeconomic backgrounds that are also being victims of trafficking.
Exactly.
And one sort of tool for that is social media. So young people are online all the time, oftentimes oversharing personal information. And so traffickers are able to interact with them, connect, build that relationship, build those bonds with them online. So that's sort of another educational point.
Yeah, it's universal. I think that people think that their socioeconomic status, or if they live in the suburbs, or even if they're from, a pretty tight-knit family, that their children are not going to be subject to these issues. And the research does not, and anecdotal research does not bear that out. And we see here at Women's College Hospital, young women from every walk of life coming through our doors as victims of trafficking. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. So there is no safe place for young women that traffickers will not try to find them. And online, you're right, is one of the key gateways. So let's get back to, we have a scenario where a young woman has been trafficked. She's perhaps been physically harmed, she's been traumatized, and she starts intersecting with the healthcare system. What are you seeing and hearing as the experience that they have?
Yes, and so the healthcare system is really a critical intervention point for victims of trafficking. The data suggests that almost 88% of victims of trafficking will interact within a healthcare system at some point during their exploitation, but oftentimes they're not being identified. And so they're coming in, again, like you said, they're not coming in and raising their hand and say, I'm being trafficked. They're not going to disclose that trafficking status. They're coming in for other health issues. Potentially there was an assault or an injury, STIs, other things that they're coming in for. And they may not be presenting in a way in which people have an idea of how a victim should present. So they're not going to come in necessarily meek and quiet and shy. They might come in there, quite,
belligerent,
right? Yeah, they could come in there. They could be, annoyed. They could just be difficult. They might not be interested in any support that you want to give them. And so oftentimes people see that as, okay, this person isn't being victimized. They're okay. When in reality, that's a reaction from trauma.
Exactly.
This is why it is so important for healthcare providers to be educated on the signs of trafficking, what to look for, but also how to be able to provide that trauma-informed, survivor-centered care. That approach is going to make somebody feel comfortable disclosing. And again, they may not disclose no matter how sort of comfortable and safe that space is. Right. But maybe the next time they come in, they might feel a little bit more comfortable about sharing their story or what's going on. But so they don't come in and they don't feel stigmatized. They don't feel that their needs are being ignored and that they're just, 5 minutes, come in, see me, and go out. And so this is where the importance of having that education and the research currently that we're conducting with Women's College Hospital is focusing on healthcare providers, social service providers, understanding their knowledge, their practices around trafficking. What do they know about sex trafficking? What are they expecting to see when someone comes in? But then also we're going to be talking to survivors of trafficking and asking them, what was your experience like? What could have been better? What do you wish someone had said to you? Or what do you wish they hadn't said to you? That's also
when you think about coming into a hospital and an emergency department, if a person, you think of the lack of privacy. I mean, we've all been in an emergency department and overheard a conversation about somebody's health condition. You can imagine the stigma and the fear. And we know at Women's College Hospital, quite honestly, that one-to-one relationship, that person often shadows the person they're trafficking 24/7. They have no freedom. They have no agency. Often they don't even have access to a cell phone. And we've seen these people come in to appointments with, the victims that they are victimizing and sit in the room and refuse to leave, or sit in and listen to every single conversation so nothing can be said. So you're right. You need such a nuanced and thoughtful response to be able to figure out what's going on, even get that conversation started and earn the trust. And there's so much fear. I can only imagine that the person trying to escape is so traumatized that they can't make rational decisions. But I want to touch base on something you started talking about. I think a lot of people think that there's one or two people that victims can come into contact with that can solve this problem. And what I've learned over the time that we've spent with the HART Foundation and wonderful people like you and the researchers is that it's going to take literally a village. It's going to take the whole system shifting how they treat, what they know, even how they define sex trafficking to make a dent in it. So talk about all the people that you think need to be involved in helping to solve for this. So there's people like you doing the research, but you touched on a couple of other providers that I think people don't think about. I think of teachers in the school and your wonderful video and being able to educate them. And I think of, social workers. Who else would you say has to be involved?
Oh, absolutely. I would say this has to be a community effort. And so to your point, social workers, teachers, and teachers particularly, because they're the ones that see children every day. So they're the ones, similar to parents, are going to be able to pick up on changes in behavior, in their dress. If they're hanging out with different kids all of a sudden, if their grades are dropping, like a teacher will notice that thing. It also could be within their, their faith leader, if they're a part of a faith community. We have, police, obviously there's police involvement, there's children's welfare services involved. And so there really is a whole community. But I think it is important as well, too, young people to be educated on this, because what we also see is, well, a young person may not be victimized by trafficking. They may see something in one of their friends. They may see something in someone else that they know and say, hey, something's not right here. Now that person is not able to see that. They're so sort of engrossed in that relationship with their trafficker, they can't identify it, but someone else might be able to see that. And then again, go to a trusted adult who are able to provide additional supports.
Well, this is a really, this just touches on something very personal for me. As I mentioned off the top, I have two sons, and my younger son goes to university, and he has a friend who is working in a restaurant, as many young people do. And last year, he told me that one of her regular customers started paying for her cell phone. And I was really alarmed by that, because I felt like that was such an inappropriate overreach of a, customer relationship. And he started describing the behavior to me. And it's only because I've had all of these conversations with people like you and the people involved in this work that I started recognizing some of the patterns of what I considered as a layperson grooming. And it's because you guys had given me that language and that understanding, that framework of how it's done. It wasn't going to be some complex ring that I tried to attract her. And I actually went and I spoke to her parents. And it took a lot of, courage to do that. But it really was because I had the basis of some of the language and some of the things that I had learned at Women's College Hospital. And so I think that it's so important that we give people the language that they need in order to identify sex trafficking, because I think there's a lot of confusion about it. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about research and why we need to really talk not just about the people around the person being trafficked, but the perspectives of the person being trafficked specifically. And here in Canada and the United States, there's so much that needs to be done and so little bit of research that includes the voices of the survivors. So I want to start with, why is that important? Why can't we just try to fix it from outside the system? I know it seems very obvious, but in your own words, why do the survivors have to be part of the architecture of really addressing sex trafficking?
Yes, and I would say historically, that's exactly what we've done. We've looked to service providers, we look to other people to understand what trafficking is and to create solutions for trafficking, but have not included the voices of people with lived experience. Or if they are included, it's oftentimes in a very tokenistic way where they're just sort of invited in at the very end, but it's not really a meaningful engagement. And so we are starting to see this shift, at least in the work that I do, where survivors' expertise is being recognized.
Mhm.
They're being asked to help inform policy, work on research, help create curriculums, do trainings, and they're being obviously fairly compensated for that work. I think it's so important because when you think of how trafficking happens and sort of that nuances of how they may present within a healthcare system, or what types of support someone's going to need, or the type of language that's going to work. And again, everybody is different, but being able to talk to people who've lived it, who've gone through it, they're going to be able to provide a different perspective that you're not going to get from a provider, that you're not going to get from somebody else. And this is why I personally always advocate for survivors to be not only in this work, but centered, their voices to be centered in this work, and a diverse, and I want to emphasize this part, a diverse group of survivors. Because as we were talking about before, there's no one experience of trafficking. It doesn't look one way. So if we just talk to one person, if you just talk to me, for instance, you're only going to get my understanding, my lived experiences. But again, my lived experiences are shaped by many different things. So it's important to bring survivors of different ages, different ethnicities, different backgrounds together, and to be able to gather their insights when we're doing work.
So when you're doing your research, Rhonelle, how do you go about it? I'm very curious because I would imagine there's this huge reluctance to talk about it. How do you find those voices, those brave people, especially when a lot of the people being trafficked, you said the status under 25. I've heard young women as young as 8 are being lured. How do you get them to, not just relive this trauma and feel like it's actually going to make a difference? How do you make sure they don't feel like they're being exploited once again? That for me is so important. And I just would love to hear, what are some of the things that you have found that have helped these, really, really fragile people be a part of the solution?
Well, I think within my work and within the work at Women's College Hospital with the Astor team is we have a very community-based approach. Okay. And so that means we are working with people, not on people.
Oh,
and what
I love
I found
that.
with survivors of trafficking most often is they want to share their stories.
Okay.
They want to be heard, but they don't want to feel as if their trauma is just sort of being taken, like you said, and being exploited. They want to know that by sharing the story, it's going to make a difference. It will be able to impact something. And so when we're doing research, we're engaging with people with lived experience, we're fully forthcoming on this is what the research is. This is what we're doing. This is the intent. We have knowledge translation tools that we'll be making available to people to be able to access sort of that end product of the research. So they have some ownership in what we're creating together. And as well for our research, we will be we'll be incorporating peer advisors. So something a little bit unique. So what that is people with lived experience will be working with us as part of this research project, as we're doing, creating some of the tools, as well as looking through the analysis and then eventual write-up. And so I think it's really important when you're doing work within vulnerable communities, it really should be community-based. It really should be incorporating people at every stage of that research, as opposed to sort of just, coming to people when it's over and saying, okay, take a look at this, please, and sign off on it.
Well, what's so interesting is if there's an overrepresentation of vulnerable communities, these are communities who traditionally probably do not have great experiences within the healthcare system. We talked about Indigenous women, we've talked about Black women and women from different socioeconomic communities. We know that there are already barriers for these communities to come in. So it's not surprising that when you add the complexity and all the trauma of sex trafficking, of course, there's a reluctance. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the research, because I think that, having Dr. Janice Dumont and Robin Mason, who are two of the most exceptional researchers, internationally renowned for their transformational work in talking about gender-based violence. And that's what sex trafficking is. It's another form of misogyny and gender-based violence. I heard the term, a child prostitute. And I said, there's no such thing as a child prostitute. There's a victim of, child prostitution, but no child is a prostitute. So they can't consent to that. And so the kind of work that Janice and Robin have done in gender-based violence is what we're trying to expand to include sex trafficking, because I think it's sort of been orphaned on its own as this, standalone area that isn't about gender-based violence, but we know that it is at the epicenter of that. And we're so pleased that they've included our what we call our HART fellows, people like you, to do this work, because they've been doing this for over 30 years. And we need a whole new generation of people working in this area and taking it on. That's why it's so exciting that you're doing your PhD in this. So elaborate how sex trafficking fits into gender-based violence, because I think people think of it as a completely separate thing, just it's sort of a crime that takes place outside of that. But maybe you could talk a little bit about how it's actually part of the whole spectrum of gender-based violence.
Absolutely. And I'll say too, I'm very fortunate as a PhD student wanting to do work on sex trafficking to be able to work with doctors, Janice Dumont and Robin Mason, as you mentioned, leading the ASTER team, because not only do I work with them, but they're also my mentors. And so coming from community, and I have a background in community, moving into academic research is something very new for me. So I'm very appreciative of having support, and also the entire team of ASTER, which is made up of social workers, psychologists, public health researchers. So a very interdisciplinary team we have there. But I think to your question on looking at sex trafficking and as sort of gender-based violence is, we know it is a gendered crime. We know it's a crime that disproportionately impacts women, particularly young women, girls. It's one of, great, immense physical, sexual violence involved in it. And so I think for a long time, like you said, it was sort of situated outside of the whole idea of gender-based violence. And perhaps that was because of the misunderstandings around trafficking, the idea that it was these big organized crimes and gangs. So it became something a little bit different. But I think as we sort of strip away all that and we understand what it is, it's the abuse, exploitation, primarily of women and girls.
Right.
This is what is happening, happening because of, we can look at sort of a broader sort of structural level because of things like patriarchy, misogyny, because of the way we value women in society, the way we commodify and sexualize women, particularly young women and girls. And this is what we see. We see women being valued as property to be bought and sold. And so there's a much bigger, I think, conversation we have to have if we want to tackle sex trafficking, is really understanding the way we look at and value women and girls in our society.
You're so right. It's part of a big complex picture, and trying to silo it as a almost an economic crime is where I think we lose traction as it being part of the whole sexual violence around women and young girls. So let's talk a little bit about some of the signs and red flags that parents and adults can be looking for. I think that all of us want to leave here today, I think, armed with what can we do. When I talk to people, we have wonderful people from Sotheby's who've been doing fundraising for us. We, Echelon Financial, Home Depot, many people have put up their hand and said, we want to do something. We want to be part of, helping to end this. We know that it's going to be a long-term solution. We know that research and education are necessary. But like me, that day when I heard my son talking about this bizarre behavior, I wanted to be able to do something. And I felt so empowered, just having a few of the right words and examples to share with someone. So let's start talking about what can we do? How can we end the status quo? How can we stop the silence? How can we move things forward? Let's start talking about some of the warning signs again that parents, aunts, uncles, teachers, whoever you are, can be looking for the young women in their lives, and talk about that.
Yeah, so some of the signs we see, particularly within young people, is a change in their behavior. So we have a student who was doing really well in school, and all of a sudden they're failing all their classes. They're dressed differently. They might be dressed now more provocatively, wearing, makeup before they didn't wear makeup, or they're wearing a lot of makeup. All of a sudden they have very expensive gifts, bags, purses, watches, things that, for a young person, where are they coming up with the money
out of reach
to have these items? That should be a huge red flag. They're distant. They have new people in their lives. They have new friends, or maybe a new boyfriend in their life. Maybe he's a little bit older, maybe he's not, but they don't want to share that with you. They don't want to talk about it to anybody. They're very, really secretive. And oftentimes what I tell parents is follow your gut instinct. Nobody knows your child better than you. No one knows your child better than a parent does. If something doesn't feel right, if you see that change in your child, it's better to be proactive, to reach out, to have that conversation, to find someone for them to talk to. Maybe they need, therapeutic support, something like that, than to just ignore it and say, you know what, it's no big deal. Because maybe you're wrong. Hopefully you are wrong, but just in case, that slight chance that something is happening, that someone is trying to groom your child, you want to be able to prevent that before it happens. And as well, like I was saying before, with teachers, because they see the students every day as well too. So they're able to see those changes that maybe other people who are new in that young person's life may not pick up. And so that's number one thing. If people have questions, people have concerns, Canada has a national hotline. So I want to make sure I get the number right. It's 1-833-900-1010. So this is the part of the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. This national hotline, it's open 24/7, 7 days a week within multilingual, different languages. This is a great resource tool for parents, for community members, for anybody to go. They have staff there that can ask questions, find out if there's resources wherever you live across Canada. So I think having those, kind of within your toolkit, places like the national hotline that you can contact, and just really being aware and being perceptive about what's happening. And, if there's any changes within a young person's life.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So we're going to finalize our talk before we go to the audience with some questions. So tell us about what your hopes and dreams are for your work as you pursue your Ph.D. and you're working, with the team at Women's College Hospital. Tell us, what's keeping you inspired. It's such a difficult, heavy area to work in, but we'd love to hear what your hopes are for the future.
Yes, and it really is a heavy topic. And so I'm very mindful of that. And I think, ensuring that, I have self-care, I prioritize that, as well as work-life balance. And I'm very fortunate that my team at Astor, they're obviously supportive of that work-life balance. But I think for me, what I hope for the future is that we can really move the needle within our understanding, our supports, and our care for persons who've been sex trafficked. That this research that we're doing right now at Women's College is only the beginning. Okay. This is really only the foundation, because to your point earlier, we just don't know. We don't have any research within a Canadian context. And so being able to create this foundation of understanding, what does sex trafficking look like in Canada? What do health providers and social service providers know about trafficking? And what are survivors telling us? What do they want us to know? How can we better support them? And really being able to take that and action it, being able to use this knowledge, and not that it just, sort of stays within the ivy towers of academia, but it's used to create policy, to inform funding, to inform future research. Like, to me, I hope this is really just the beginning of a lot more work that we're going to do, because not only do we want to do that to be able to prevent trafficking, intervene in trafficking, but we want to be able to support those who've been sex trafficked. We want to, diminish the stigma that so many people live with for the rest of their life, the challenges that they're facing 10, 20 years later. I work with these women. They're still dealing with so much trauma and so much pain because they don't have the appropriate resources. They don't have access to those. They don't have access to safe housing. There's so many different issues, and I probably could go on forever about those issues. I know I can, but really, I would just say my hope is that this is just the beginning of a lot more work and investment within ending trafficking.
Well, I think you touched on something so important, which I know those of us who are sort of working alongside with you and supporting you and funding the type of work that you're doing, which is not always the type of work that gets the headlines in healthcare and in hospitals. During the pandemic, we saw an exponential jump in the calls to our hotline for women who were being abused, physically abused. And that included many women that were being trafficked. And we know that we'll only ever know a small portion of the people that are actually being trafficked, and very few of them will walk through our doors. So that's why I think the work you're doing is so important, because it includes their voices, and we get a nice cross section of what do they need, what do they want, and it's not from our point of view, it's from their point of view. I'm going to talk a little bit about policy, because even though the research is so new, it really has the ability to shape policy. And I just want you to explain to people why academic research and not just anecdotal data is really important in this area, and how it might be used in the future to shape policy, if you can.
Absolutely. And I will say, like, I have a community, I come from the background of community and community research. And so, but I've also done work within policy, and policymakers look for evidence-based research. They look for academic research when they're looking to create policies, when they're thinking of legislation. And so that's really the reason why we have to have that. But I think, community research, obviously has a great value, and both together, are really able to shape our understanding of trafficking and create better services and programming. But to inform policy, we need things that are rooted within evidence. It can't just be anecdotal. We need something more. And I think the research that we're doing right now really is going to be able to help shape that, inform that policy, but also future funding.
Mm-hmm.
We need data, you need statistics, you need that data to be able to inform where funding should go to or where it shouldn't go to. And so right now we don't have that. So this is also really important, the work that we're doing.
Well, the good news is, because of the funding that we've received from the HART Foundation, we are coming to the end of the first tranche of research that we need to set the foundation. This research will be internationally relevant, but most importantly, will help Canadian people make decisions around policy and trauma-informed care for people who are survivors of sex trafficking, and all the people that need to be involved in helping them. I love that the research is talking to all those intersections of police and social workers, nurse practitioners, physicians, teachers, and survivors to make sure there's that wraparound care. All right, well, as you said, we could be here all afternoon, but we have lots of questions from the audience. So I do want to take a few minutes and have an opportunity to answer some of the questions so that we make sure that our audience feels completely part of this conversation. I'm sure they got as much out of it as I. I love your passion and the fact that you come from community, but you also are doing this academic research, and that you have lived experience. It's just that beautiful intersectionality, which makes you such a wonderful champion and an authentic voice in this important space. So I want to personally thank you for that. Okay, we're going to go to some of our questions. So let me see if do we have any questions that have come from the audience? I believe I have a member of my team, but I'm gonna just start with one of the ones that was submitted in advance. How can we ensure Indigenous sex trafficking survivors' voices are also centered? And I think this goes back to our point of how do you make sure that they feel that that it's trusted, and that we're actually going to reach Indigenous women, because if they're 40% of the people being trafficked, obviously their voices are among the most important. Can you speak a little bit about Indigenous women?
Yes, and I think to be able to address the needs of Indigenous women and girls, we need to include Indigenous women and girls within this work that we're doing. This should be led by Indigenous women, by the Indigenous community. Again, to that point of not doing research on people, but with people, but also centering their voices. Within the work and within the research that we're doing, we are using an intersectional framework. Intersectionality, as you know, that looks at the intersecting identities that we have, such as race, gender, class, and how those create systems of privilege, but also systems of oppression. And so coming from an intersectional lens, we understand that we need to center the most marginalized voices first. And so that is Indigenous women and girls. That is communities from LGBTQ plus communities, racialized communities. Understanding that the needs that they have are oftentimes overlapped by structural violence, by a history of colonization, of racism, that that will take a lot more work and more research, and to be very thoughtful about the work that we're doing if we really want to be able to make an impact on those communities. But most importantly, that work has to be done with that community and led by those communities.
So the Indigenous community, one of the questions is that, are there specific supports in place right now for the Indigenous community? Do you think in Toronto, or, many Indigenous people live in urban settings? I think it's a misperception that most of them don't. Do you think that there are resources now, or is that what your research is trying to inform?
So there are resources that are specific to the Indigenous community. The last round of funding that the Ontario government released for anti-trafficking initiatives, there was money that was earmarked specifically for Indigenous communities to address sex trafficking. Is there more work that needs to be done? Is there more knowledge and awareness that needs to be out there? Of course. And I do hope through our research that we will be able to understand, particularly within the intersection with the healthcare system, what are Indigenous women and girls, what are their needs, what are their experiences like, and how can we help improve those experiences?
So, a lot of, what people, the things that people ask about is how to, personally intervene. So one of the questions is around, the amount of control that traffickers often have over people's phones, access to the computers. And, you talked about social media being one of the main ways that people end up entering. What can you tell us about how technology perhaps is being used to lure, but more importantly, how are there ways that we can use technology to support people being trafficked? People have talked about, can we put flyers in places where, they can know that there's help available. I know you talk to people, primarily as they're trying to exit, but is there anything that we can do while they're, really in the thick of it?
Yes, and to your point, the technology or social media in particular is an avenue for traffickers to be able to engage with young people and build that relationship. But we can also use technology to fight trafficking. So that what you were referring to, sort of the signage I've seen in airports, where they actually will have signage that will say, usually within women's bathrooms, so they're hidden away. There might be a number that they can call or they can reach out to. And there's different technologies that I've heard of people are working on. I think there's still a lot of work there. Again, I think we still need a lot of our basic understanding of trafficking, what it looks like, how people are trafficked, the challenges and the barriers they have to exiting trafficking before we can introduce new technologies. I think there's still some work there. But I will say that when it comes to people wanting to intervene, I do want to caution that.
Right.
Do not do that.
No, and everybody
okay.
wants to, including me. I used myself as an example because there's this overwhelming desire to help in some way. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes, and the example that you gave was perfect. You had heard something that didn't sound right. Kind of your spidey sense went off when you'd heard something from your one of your children's friends, and so you reached out to their parents, and you had that conversation, and they were able to intervene. So this is a perfect example of what to do. But what I mean is not to actually go physically try to intervene when someone's being trafficked, because oftentimes they don't think they're being trafficked. They don't even know they're being trafficked. So if you were to get somebody, sort of grab them off the street and say, you're being trafficked, you're being exploited, I'm here to save you. Yeah. They're going to look at you maybe like you're crazy.
Right.
They're going to think, what are you doing? I'm not being trafficked. This is my boyfriend. He loves me. He's helping me. We're building this new life together. Right. And so I would never caution that. It's calling, resources like the national hotline, like I mentioned. Obviously, if there's any immediate concerns, calling the authorities, calling the police. But it's really trying to find supports and services for that young person, as opposed to physically trying to intervene, which could put you in danger as well.
No, I totally agree. And I had a colleague who said she did that. She confronted a young woman, and then the young woman disappeared completely. And she really was quite distraught because she didn't know what had happened to her. So you're right. You can often make the situation worse if you intervene in an incorrect way. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple more of these questions. So we talked a little bit about policy and political figures supporting. You've worked both in community and on policy. You're working in academia now. Do you feel like our political leaders are paying enough attention? And I think I know the answer to this, but what more do you think can be done? We know that funding is a major issue. But would is there legislation you think that needs to be carried out? And what do you think needs to be done in the area of policy with political figures?
Yeah, so I will say, I want to give the government some credit.
Okay.
We do have a national strategy at both the provincial and the federal level.
Good
so
to
there
know.
is, funding and a strategy in place to address trafficking. I think what has happened or what is happening is there's so many competing issues. We
Right.
obviously came out of a COVID-19, the pandemic, homelessness we see is rampant. I'm in Toronto, so homelessness is a major issue in Toronto. We see
And
mental
across the
illness.
country. Yeah.
Across the country, yes, exactly. And so there's so many competing issues that our leaders, our public leaders are managing, that I think trafficking oftentimes gets lost in that. And so as an advocate, my role and many other people's role is really to sort of continually keep the conversation there, to really center this conversation so it doesn't get lost. So we keep talking about it. Regular people, everyday people, can reach out to their leaders at the, at the local level, at the provincial level, and say, what are you doing about trafficking? I'm concerned about this issue in my community. What are you doing? It is your responsibility to protect our children. And, what are you doing? And I think we have to do that. I think we have to hold our leaders accountable. If they say they're going to do something, we have to ensure that they do it. And we have to really kind of keep our finger on the button when it comes to trafficking. So again, it doesn't get lost with all the other issues, competing issues that are going on right now.
I agree. I often use the example how people will lobby to have the speed limit around a school lowered, and they will make sure that it is safe for their children to cross the street, and they'll make sure that they have people, there to assist them, and they will call their municipal representative, their provincial or federal representative to have those, speed bumps installed. But with something as important as trafficking, people are often hesitant to, weigh in and call those political leaders and say, I want to hear what your plan is. I want to hear what you're doing. I want to hear substantively what you're funding and how you're supporting, because it's just as important as putting those speed bumps to me around the school. So there are a number of questions about, the research we're doing and who we're working with. People have cited the faith communities. People have talked about other foundations and other research that has been done across the country, perhaps not in a substantial way. Can you talk a little bit about how we're working in community on this research, and if we're working in community on this research?
Yeah, so for the lived experience study that we will be doing, like I said before, we are going to be engaging with community members, so agencies that are supporting survivors of trafficking. That will also help with our recruitment of survivors, but also to ensure that we're bringing on people, participants within this research that are in a healthy place. So they're in a place where they're able to comfortably share their stories, talk to their lived experience in a way that won't be sort of re-traumatizing to them. So we are working with community to be able to help build that recruitment for our study.
That's great. And I have a really great question, because one of the things that we really struggle with, I think, in the healthcare setting is, what are the right questions to ask when somebody comes in to a clinical setting, and they might come through many clinics. A lot of people think everybody presents at Emerge, which is not true. They could come in dermatology. I had one of our physicians say they came through cardiology. They were having huge cardiac events that were unrelated to trafficking, but were that's not what brought them to the hospital, but then they found out that the person was actually being trafficked. So talk about a little bit why we need evidence-based research and resources specifically for clinical situations, and why that's so important, that we can't just base it on anecdotal evidence, and that we have to do this kind of rigorous examination of the literature, speak to the right people, have their survivors, and then collate it into academic research for it to impact clinical care. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. And so even in the sort of preliminary findings from the healthcare provider study that we've done, healthcare providers are saying, how do I identify trafficking? They're not sure how to identify it. But even if they are able to identify it, what do I say? Like, how do I approach somebody? How do I support someone that's been a victim of trafficking? And so there is sort of that that lack of awareness and knowledge that we've already identified early on within our research. And so this is why it's so important that we're doing this work, and that we're going to be talking to healthcare providers, that we're going to be talking to survivors, again, to hear from their perspective, what would have helped? What would you have wanted to hear? If you'd come in for an injury, would you automatically disclose to your healthcare provider that you were trafficked? What could they have said or done or something that maybe would have made it more comfortable? And I think we talked about this before, even something as simple as having privacy, having a space or a room within the hospital, within the setting where they can go and have a private one-on-one conversation where no one's going to be around. And if the trafficker is with them, a way to be able to separate them from that trafficker. So it's all those little sort of the complexities of trafficking and how it presents that our research is going to be able to help to identify, but also then hopefully be able to create solutions or recommendations that we can use moving forward for curriculum. So curriculum and training for healthcare providers, supports and understanding, and tools that we can share, not just to healthcare providers, but to the general public.
That's wonderful. Okay, this is my last question. It's really for you. 20 years from now, when you're Dr. Rhonelle, which will not be 20 years from now, but after 20 years of being a doctor, what are you hoping will be different in the ecosystem around trafficking? What are you hoping for?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say if I was, wishful thinking would be that we wouldn't have trafficking. We wouldn't have these kinds of conversations. We wouldn't have to be doing this work. I could transition into be doing some other kind of research, but, I'm a realist. And so I don't know if that's necessarily true. So what I would want to see is that we have moved much further along. I think of domestic violence and how in the beginning, when we were talking about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, there was so much victim blaming. Why isn't she leaving? Why is she going back? And over time, through the research, through that evidence-based research that you're referring to, we were able to understand what trauma bonding is, sort of that abuse cycle that victims go through. And so now we're in a completely different area of understanding domestic violence, intimate partner violence. And I would hope within sex trafficking, we're there. And I mean, I hope it takes, much less than 20 years, but we're really able to understand what it looks like, how victims present, the supports that victims need. But again, to be able to do that work so that people don't become trafficked in the first place. And that
is a beautiful dream. And I think we're going to dream that dream together, but we're also going to do the hard work. So I'm going to end up with a special thank you to Rhonelle for joining us today. You leave us much better informed than when we began this conversation, and we thank you for your advocacy. For those of you who want to make a donation to this incredible program and the research that's being done, please don't hesitate to support what HART is doing and support the survivors of sex trafficking. You can go to our website, wchf.ca, or by scanning your QR code on this slide. We'll share the information and the resources after this webinar so that you can stay informed and share. Tell people what you heard. Share the video. Make sure that you keep yourself informed. We want to have your feedback on this webinar, so we're going to have a short survey that you can fill out, and I hope you will take a few minutes to do it. In the meantime, it will take all of us to be allies in this area, and we thank you so much for being on this journey with us, and thank you for being part of this In Conversation With. It's a very, very important subject, and we're glad you were here. Wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye, be safe, take care.